I won $54 million in the lottery. After a lifetime of being treated like a financial burden by my own family, I decided to run one final test before claiming the ticket. I sat alone in the freezing waiting room of a small emergency clinic on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, clutching my phone with shaking hands. Inside the pocket of my worn denim jacket was a tiny piece of paper that had just turned my entire life upside down. The winning Powerball ticket. $54 million. But before I hired lawyers, financial advisors, or claimed a single cent of that money, I needed to know one thing. If my life actually depended on them, would my family help me? So I did something cruel. I called my mother and told her I was sitting in an emergency room and needed $900 immediately for emergency surgery. I forced my voice to shake as I begged her for help. What she said next shattered every last illusion I had about the people who raised me. She sighed in pure annoyance. Then she told me my poverty was my own fault, and she hung up. At that moment, sitting alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights of that empty clinic, I realized something terrifying. I was about to become the richest person in my entire family, and they had just proven they would rather let me die than lend me $900. But what happened next would change everything, because the only person who showed up that night was someone my family never expected. My sister-in-law, and the moment she walked through those hospital doors, soaked from driving 3 hours through a violent storm just to help me, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, she was the only real family I had, and second, my mother, my brother, and my golden child sister had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because in exactly 1 month at our annual Thanksgiving dinner in Seattle, I was going to tear their entire fake empire apart. Piece by piece, legally, and they would never see it coming. The buzzing fluorescent lights above the emergency clinic waiting room made everything feel colder than it really was. I sat alone in a cracked vinyl chair, elbows resting on my knees, staring down at the small piece of paper clutched in my trembling hands. It looked so ordinary, just a thin strip of printed thermal paper from a gas station counter. But the numbers printed across the top had completely rewritten my future. Powerball winning ticket. Cash value, $54 million. Even now, nearly an hour after checking the numbers for the 20th time on my phone, my brain still struggled to believe it was real. $54 million. For 32 years of my life, I had been the family disappointment, the struggling illustrator, the daughter who refused to grow up, the sister who chose art instead of a respectable career. According to my family, my entire life had been a long list of bad decisions, and now suddenly, I had more money than all of them combined. But before I called any lawyers, before I claimed the ticket, before I even allowed myself to imagine what that kind of money could do, I needed an answer to one simple question. If I truly needed help, would my family actually care? The cold waiting room around me smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Outside the clinic windows, heavy rain hammered against the glass, the kind of storm that turned the roads into rivers and kept normal people safe inside their homes. But tonight, I needed the storm. It made everything feel believable. I took a slow breath and unlocked my phone. My finger hovered over the contact name for several seconds. Mom, Margaret Reed. I pressed call. The phone rang 3 times. 4. Finally, she answered with a sharp sigh. Olivia? Do you have any idea what time it is? Her voice sounded irritated, not concerned, not worried, just annoyed. I forced my voice to shake. Mom, I'm at the emergency room right now. There was a short pause. Then she said flatly, Why? I swallowed hard, letting my voice crack. The doctors think my appendix is about to rupture. They need to operate immediately, but my insurance lapsed last week because of a billing error. The hospital needs a $900 deposit before they can admit me. I wiped my eyes, forcing the tears to sound real. Mom, please, I'm in a lot of pain. For a moment, the line went quiet. I waited for the response any daughter hopes to hear. Where are you? I'm coming right now. Don't worry, sweetheart. Instead, she laughed. Not loudly, but coldly. Olivia, she said, your financial problems are not my responsibility. The words felt like ice sliding down my spine. Mom, please, I whispered. It's just a loan. I'll pay you back. Another sigh. In the background, I could hear soft music and the faint clinking of wine glasses. She wasn't at home. She was at the country club. You chose to spend your life drawing little pictures on a computer instead of building a real career like Victoria, she continued. That was your decision. My chest tightened. I'm literally in the emergency room. And that, she replied calmly, is the natural consequence of bad life choices. Then the line went dead. She hung up. Just like that. I stared down at the silent phone in my hand while the rain outside intensified, pounding against the windows like a drum. 32 years. 32 years of trying to earn her approval. And when I finally asked for help, $900. That was the price of her compassion. And apparently, I wasn't worth it. I slowly lowered the phone into my lap. For a few seconds, I simply sat there in the quiet waiting room, listening to the storm. The test should have been over. I already had my answer. But something inside me needed to be absolutely certain. So I opened my contacts again. This time I tapped my sister's name. Victoria Reed, the golden child, the successful real estate agent, the daughter who could do no wrong. The phone rang once, then it went straight to voicemail. A second later, a text message appeared. Busy closing a deal, stop calling. I let out a quiet breath. 2 calls, 2 answers, both exactly what I expected. My family would rather protect their schedules than help me survive a medical emergency. I folded the lottery ticket carefully and slipped it back into the inner pocket of my jacket. $54 million. And the only people who were supposed to love me had just proven something important. Money had always mattered more to them than I did. I was about to stand up and leave when the automatic glass doors of the clinic suddenly burst open. A violent gust of wind and rain swept into the lobby. Then someone rushed inside. She was soaked from head to toe. Her dark curls clung to her face, and her blue nursing scrubs were completely drenched. She stood there breathing heavily, scanning the waiting room. When her eyes landed on me, relief flooded her expression. "Olivia!" She ran across the room. Before I could react, she wrapped her freezing arms tightly around me. "I drove as fast as I could," she said breathlessly. "The highway is flooding. Are you okay? Have they taken you in for surgery yet?" I froze, because the woman who had just driven 3 hours through a storm to save me was the one person I hadn't called. Amara Reed, my sister-in-law. And in that moment, while the rain roared outside and she pressed a small envelope of crumpled cash into my hands, I realized something that would change the rest of my life. The only real family I had was standing right in front of me, and my blood relatives had just made a mistake they would regret forever. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to support you, you probably already know how this story is going to end. But trust me, they had no idea what was coming next. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Amara's arms were still wrapped tightly around my shoulders, and her entire body was trembling from the cold rain that had soaked through her clothes. "You're freezing," I finally said, pulling back slightly. "I'm fine," she insisted quickly. "Did they take you in yet? How bad is the pain?" Her eyes searched my face anxiously, like she was trying to measure how much time I had left. The guilt hit me harder than I expected, because unlike everyone else in my family, she actually believed me. Before I could say anything, Amara quickly opened the small envelope she had shoved into my hands. Inside was a messy stack of damp bills, 10s, 20s. Some of them still folded from the ATM. "There's $300 here," she said breathlessly. "It's everything I could pull out tonight." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a faded blue credit card. "My card has a $500 limit," she continued, pressing it into my hand. "I paid the minimum balance yesterday, so there should still be enough room to cover the rest of the hospital deposit." She looked over her shoulder nervously toward the reception desk. "Quick, take it to them before your appendix bursts." I stared down at the damp cash and the cheap credit card resting in my palm. $300. It wasn't much money, but to Amara, it was everything. My throat tightened. "Amara," I said quietly. She immediately shook her head. "Don't argue with me. We can figure everything else out later. Right now, you need surgery." "You drove 3 hours in this storm for me?" I asked softly. "Of course I did." She looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. "You said you were alone in the emergency room." That simple sentence made my chest ache, because technically, I was alone, just not for the reason she thought. I hesitated for a moment before asking the question that had been bothering me since she arrived. "Why do you only have a $500 credit card?" Amara was a full-time registered nurse in the pediatric ward. She should have had better financial stability than that. For the first time since she arrived, she looked uncomfortable. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Well, she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly. Daniel handles the finances. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means my paycheck goes directly into his account, she said quietly. The words came out so casually it took my brain a second to process them. Your paycheck? I repeated. She nodded. He says it's easier that way since he manages the household budget. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she had explained it many times before. And the credit card? I asked. That's my personal allowance card. Allowance? Amara gave a small, embarrassed laugh. It's not as bad as it sounds. But the look in her eyes told a very different story. He gives me $100 a week for gas and groceries, she continued. If I spend more than that, he gets upset. The rain hammered harder against the clinic windows. I could feel my hands slowly tightening into fists. My brother Daniel was a regional sales director who made well over 6 figures every year. Meanwhile, his wife, the woman who had just driven through a storm to help me, was living on an allowance like a teenager. And tonight? I asked quietly. Daniel thinks I'm working an overnight shift. Her voice dropped even lower. If he finds out I drove down here instead. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. A cold anger began spreading through my chest. But before I could respond, Amara suddenly reached up and twisted the thin gold ring on her finger. It was old, the kind of ring passed down through generations. My grandmother's wedding ring, she explained when she noticed me looking at it. If the credit card declines, there's a 24-hour pawn shop near the interstate. My head snapped up. You're not pawning your grandmother's ring. If that's what it takes to keep you alive, I will. She said it without hesitation, without drama, just simple certainty. I felt something shift inside my chest. 30 minutes ago, I thought this night was about proving how little my family cared. But standing here now, I realized something else entirely. One person had just risked her marriage, her safety, and possibly her only valuable possession to help me, and she hadn't even been the one I called. The test was over. I slowly closed her fingers around the envelope of money and gently pushed the credit card back toward her. You should keep these, I said. Confusion filled her face. What do you mean? I forced myself to stay calm. While you were driving here, the hospital billing supervisor came out to talk to me. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. There was a mistake with my insurance cancellation, I continued. Apparently, the policy lapsed because of a clerical error on their end. Amara blinked. So the hospital has to cover the surgery. Her shoulders relaxed instantly. The operation is completely paid for. For the first time since arriving, the tension drained from her face. Oh, thank God. She let out a shaky laugh and wiped rainwater from her forehead. I thought you were going to die in here. I'm not going anywhere, I said softly. Amara pulled me into another quick hug before stepping back. Well, in that case, she said, glancing toward the storm outside, I should probably head back before Daniel wakes up. I nodded. That's probably a good idea. She turned toward the doors but paused halfway across the lobby. Olivia? Yeah? She gave me a tired smile. I'm really glad you called me. Then she stepped out into the storm. I watched through the glass as her old sedan disappeared into the rain. The waiting room fell silent again. Slowly, my entire posture changed. The scared patient act disappeared. I walked out of the clinic and climbed into my car. The lottery ticket was still safely tucked inside my jacket. $54 million. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. My family believed money was power. They believed wealth made them untouchable. But they had never seen real power before. I pulled out my phone and opened a search engine. 10 minutes later, I found the name I was looking for. Jonathan Pierce, senior partner, corporate wealth management attorney. The man had a reputation for dismantling financial empires without leaving fingerprints. Perfect. I opened my email and began typing. My name is Olivia Reed. I am the sole owner of a winning Powerball ticket worth $54 million. I need you to claim it anonymously through a holding company. But more importantly, I need your firm to conduct a full forensic financial investigation into 3 individuals. I paused briefly before typing the names. Margaret Reed, Victoria Reed, Daniel Reed. Then I finished the email. I want every secret they're hiding, every debt, every illegal transaction, every lie, and I'm willing to pay whatever it costs. I pressed send. Then I leaned back in the driver's seat while the storm continued raging outside. My family thought they held all the power. They thought I was still the poor daughter they could humiliate whenever they wanted. But in exactly 1 month, at our annual Thanksgiving dinner in Seattle, they were going to learn the truth. And when they did, everything they had built would collapse. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8:12 in the morning. I was sitting at the tiny kitchen table inside my one-bedroom apartment in Portland, staring at the same lottery ticket that had been sitting there for the past 72 hours. I still hadn't claimed it. The paper lay flat beside my coffee mug, the printed numbers staring back at me like they were daring me to believe they were real. $54 million. Enough money to change everything. Enough money to destroy everything. My phone vibrated again across the table. Unknown number. I answered. Olivia Reed speaking. A calm, confident male voice responded immediately. Miss Reed, this is Jonathan Pierce. My heart skipped slightly. Jonathan Pierce was not the kind of lawyer who personally called people. Men like him had assistants for that, which meant something about my email had gotten his attention. I reviewed your message, he continued, and if what you're saying is accurate, you've just inherited the kind of financial leverage most people only see in movies. I leaned back in my chair. That sounds promising. It's also extremely dangerous, he said calmly. That caught my attention. How exactly? Because the moment people know you have this kind of money, he explained, everyone around you changes. Friends, family, even strangers. Which is why, he continued, the first thing we're going to do is make sure nobody ever connects your name to that lottery ticket. I glanced down at the paper sitting on my table. You can do that? Yes. How? We create a corporate entity to claim the ticket. He spoke like he'd done this 1,000 times before. A holding company that legally owns the prize. The public record will show the company as the winner, not you. And that company will belong entirely to you. I exhaled slowly. Good, because the last thing I wanted was my family discovering the truth before I was ready. Jonathan continued, but your email wasn't really about the lottery money, was it? No, I admitted. It wasn't. You want information. Exactly. There was a brief pause on the line. Tell me about them, he said. So I did. I told him about Margaret Reed, the country club dinners, the obsession with appearances, the way she treated Victoria like royalty and spoke about me like I was a permanent embarrassment. Then I told him about my sister, Victoria Reed, the golden child, the real estate agent who constantly bragged about million-dollar property deals and luxury clients. And finally, Daniel, my brother, the charming, successful sales director who lectured everyone about financial discipline while quietly controlling every dollar his wife earned. When I finished, Jonathan was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Families like yours are rarely as financially secure as they appear. What do you mean? Appearances are expensive, he replied. Country club memberships, luxury cars, private schools, designer clothing. Those things require constant cash flow. And if that cash flow disappears, they borrow. I sat up straighter. You think they're in debt? I think, Jonathan said calmly, there's a strong possibility their financial reality doesn't match the image they're projecting. That idea had honestly never crossed my mind before. My family had always acted like they were untouchable, wealthy, superior. But what if? Jonathan interrupted my thoughts. My team can conduct a full forensic financial investigation. What does that involve? We examine public financial records, property filings, corporate ownership documents, tax liens, lawsuits, loan structures, and banking patterns. How long does that take? Normally. Yes, a few weeks. And if I told you I wanted the results in 10 days? There was a small pause. Then he chuckled quietly. You're planning something. Maybe. You mentioned Thanksgiving in your email. Yes. That gives us exactly 1 month. Correct. Another pause. Miss Reed. Yes? This is going to cost a lot of money. I looked down at the lottery ticket again. Good thing I have some. That finally made him laugh. All right then, he said. Let's begin. The next few weeks moved faster than I ever expected. Jonathan's firm worked with terrifying efficiency. Within 48 hours, my lottery ticket had been transferred to a newly formed holding company called North Cascade Holdings, LLC. The company legally claimed the Powerball prize, not Olivia Reed, which meant the entire world would see a corporate name, not mine. Exactly what I wanted. But the real progress came from the investigation. Every few days, Jonathan sent small updates, fragments of information, tiny cracks forming in the perfect image my family had built. Victoria's real estate company had quietly stopped closing deals months ago. Daniel had multiple personal brokerage accounts with extremely aggressive investment activity. Margaret's country club membership had been renewed with a private loan. The deeper Jonathan's team dug, the stranger things became. Then, exactly 9 days after our first phone call, I received another message. This time, it wasn't a quick update. It was a single sentence. "We need to meet immediately." 2 hours later, I walked into a sleek glass tower in downtown Seattle. Jonathan Pierce's office sat on the 36th floor. The view stretched across the entire financial district. Inside, his office looked exactly how you'd expect a high-powered corporate attorney's office to look. Minimalist, expensive, controlled. Jonathan sat behind a polished black desk with a thick binder in front of him. When I entered, he stood. "Miss Reed." I sat across from him. "You sound serious." "I am." He slid the binder across the desk. "What you're about to read," he said calmly, "explains exactly why your sister wanted that land your father left you." My heartbeat slowed. "Wanted?" "Oh, yes." Jonathan opened the binder. "And trust me, you're going to want to see this." For a moment, I didn't touch the binder. It sat there on Jonathan Pierce's desk between us, thick and heavy, like it contained the weight of my entire family's secrets. Jonathan leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "You should open it," he said calmly. I finally reached forward. The binder was organized with colored tabs separating different sections. Jonathan had clearly prepared it carefully. The first tab read, "Victoria Reed, Financial Overview." I flipped the page. The very first document made my breath catch. A financial statement showing Victoria's real estate company, or more accurately, the lack of one. "Your sister hasn't closed a single property sale in 11 months, Jonathan explained. "That's impossible," I said immediately. "She's always posting new listings online." "Listings," he said, "not sales." He tapped the paper. "She's been advertising properties she doesn't actually control in order to maintain the appearance of an active business." I stared at the page. "But she drives a brand new luxury SUV, leased. And her penthouse apartment? Also leased. And her designer vacations?" Jonathan flipped to another page. Credit card statements. 14 different accounts. All maxed out. Total balance. $247,000. My stomach dropped. "She's drowning in debt," Jonathan said, "and the minimum payments alone are destroying her." I slowly leaned back in my chair. For years, Victoria had mocked my tiny apartment, my freelance income, my unstable life. Meanwhile, she had been secretly living on borrowed money. "How is she still functioning financially?" I asked. "She's not." Jonathan turned to another document, a letter with a federal government seal. I recognized it immediately. Internal Revenue Service. "She attempted to claim massive fraudulent business deductions," Jonathan explained. "Fake marketing expenses, fake staging costs, fake client dinners." I felt my pulse quicken. "The IRS noticed." He tapped the page. "She's currently under federal audit." My sister, the woman who had spent years bragging about financial success, was one investigation away from criminal tax evasion charges. And suddenly the memory of Thanksgiving dinner from last year flashed in my mind. Victoria raising her champagne glass, laughing about my starving artist lifestyle. I felt a cold smile forming. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He flipped to the next section. Daniel Reed, Financial Activity. The first page contained a graph. It started high, then dropped sharply, then dropped again, then collapsed. "What am I looking at?" I asked quietly. "Your brother's investment portfolio. That's normal market volatility," I said. Jonathan shook his head. "No." He turned the page. More charts. More red numbers. "Daniel isn't investing," he said calmly. "He's gambling." The word landed like a hammer. Options trading, high-risk crypto speculation, margin positions. I stared at the numbers. Millions of dollars moving through the accounts. But the ending balances were almost always the same. Zero. How much has he lost? Jonathan slid another document across the desk. Total losses over 3 years. $1.3 million. My chest tightened. That's impossible, I whispered. Daniel doesn't make that much money. Exactly. He pointed to another section of the binder. Loan documents, lines of credit, private borrowing agreements. But the next page made my heart stop. The borrower name wasn't Daniel Reed. It was Margaret Reed. That's my mother, I said. Yes. But she would never... She didn't. Jonathan turned the page toward me. Mortgage documentation, property address, my mother's house in Seattle. Loan amount, $600,000. Then another loan, $200,000 line of credit. I felt my hands go cold. Daniel forged her signature, Jonathan said quietly. The room suddenly felt smaller. He used his position managing her trust accounts to authorize the loans. He can't do that. He already did. I stared at the numbers. $800,000. Borrowed against the house my mother believed she owned outright. What happens if he defaults? I asked. Jonathan didn't hesitate. The bank forecloses. And how close is he to defaulting? Jonathan flipped to the final page of the section. A letter from the lender. Red text stamped across the top. Final notice. Intent to foreclose. Very close, he said. For several seconds I couldn't speak. My arrogant, financially brilliant brother had secretly turned my mother's home into collateral for his gambling addiction, and she had no idea. But Jonathan still wasn't finished. He opened the final section of the binder. The tab read, Reed Family Property, Rural County Parcel, my father's land, 50 acres of dirt 2 hours outside Seattle, the inheritance my family had mocked for years. Jonathan slid a large folded blueprint across the desk. Open that. I unfolded it. My eyes widened immediately. Construction plans, highways, massive buildings. What is this? A new tech development zone, he said. 3 major technology companies are building data centers in that county. I scanned the map. Then I saw it. A small red rectangle in the center. My land. What does this have to do with Victoria? I asked. Jonathan handed me another document. An email chain from the development company to Victoria Reed. Offer amount. $8 million. My heart pounded. She told them she represented the estate, Jonathan explained. They assumed she controlled the property. She doesn't. Correct. So what was her plan? Jonathan leaned back in his chair. Force you to sign it over, then sell it immediately. For $8 million. The entire picture suddenly snapped into place. Victoria's desperation, her sudden interest in the land, the pressure, the manipulation. She needed that money to escape her financial collapse, and she had planned to steal it from me. Jonathan watched my expression carefully. You see the opportunity here, he said. I slowly nodded. Oh, I see it. Because for the first time in my life, my family had handed me the weapon that could destroy them, and they didn't even realize it yet. I closed the binder slowly. Jonathan. Yes. Do you have the contact information for that development company? He smiled. I thought you might ask. I stood up, because suddenly, Thanksgiving dinner was going to be a lot more interesting this year. For the next 24 hours, everything moved very quickly. Jonathan Pierce worked like a man conducting a silent war. Phone calls, contracts, legal filings, meetings with people whose job titles alone probably cost more per hour than my old monthly rent. Meanwhile, I sat in the corner of his office conference room watching the entire operation unfold. And for the first time in my life, I understood something important. Money didn't just buy comfort. Money bought control. By noon the following day, Jonathan stepped back into the room holding a thin stack of documents. It's done, he said. I looked up from my chair. That was fast. Developers move quickly when billions of dollars are involved. He placed the paperwork on the table. The acquisition director from Cascadia Infrastructure is extremely motivated to secure highway access to the development zone. I already knew what that meant. They need my land. Desperately. Jonathan slid the contract toward me. They were originally prepared to offer your sister $8 million. But she doesn't own it, I said. Correct. And now? Jonathan allowed himself a small smile. You negotiated very well. I flipped to the final page. Purchase price, $10 million. My breath caught slightly. $10 million. For 50 acres of dirt my father bought decades ago. When does the deal close? I asked. Jonathan checked his watch. It already has. What? The funds were transferred to North Cascade Holdings this morning. He turned his laptop screen toward me. Account balance, $64 million. $54 million from the lottery. $10 million from the land sale. I stared at the number in silence. For most of my life, I had worried about paying rent. Now I had enough money to change the course of multiple lives. Jonathan watched my reaction carefully. Feeling overwhelmed? Not exactly. Then what? I closed the laptop slowly, focused, because now the plan was truly beginning. Victoria believed she had 72 hours before I signed the property transfer. She believed she would walk into her office on Wednesday and claim $8 million. But when she arrived, there would be nothing left to steal. Jonathan studied my expression. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying justice. Those two things are often the same, he said. Then he slid another document across the table. What's this? I asked. Asset acquisition paperwork. I scanned the page. Property address. My mother's house. Wait. Jonathan leaned back slightly. The foreclosure process moved faster than expected. How fast? The lender auctioned the property yesterday afternoon. My heart skipped. And? He tapped the bottom of the document. Buyer, North Cascade Holdings, LLC. You bought my mother's house? I asked. Technically, he said, your company did. I looked back down at the page. The house where I grew up. The place I had been thrown out of at 18. The same house my mother had threatened to have me arrested from just months earlier. Now it belonged to me. Jonathan watched quietly while I processed the idea. How does it feel? He asked. I thought about it for a moment. Then I said something that surprised even me, like the universe finally balanced the scales. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's one way to describe it. I folded the document closed. Good. Because I had something else to do first. Jonathan. Yes? I need you to prepare another set of documents. For what purpose? A divorce. He raised an eyebrow. Not yours, I assume. Daniel and Amara. Understanding immediately flickered across his face. You want leverage. I want protection. I leaned forward slightly. My brother has been stealing his wife's income for years. Jonathan nodded. We traced the deposits. Where did they go? He opened another file. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands. My jaw tightened. How much? Approximately $420,000. My hands slowly curled into fists. Amara had been living on $100 a week while Daniel secretly hoarded her salary offshore. Jonathan slid the divorce paperwork toward me. If Daniel refuses to sign these documents, he said calmly, the evidence of wire fraud and financial abuse goes directly to federal investigators. And if he does sign? He returns the money. I nodded. Perfect. Jonathan closed the folder. You're dismantling your entire family in one afternoon. Not exactly. I stood up and walked toward the window overlooking downtown Seattle. I'm just exposing what they really are. The city stretched below us like a giant chessboard. And for the first time in my life, I had all the pieces. Jonathan walked up beside me. When does the meeting with your family take place? Tomorrow. Location? Victoria's office. Ambitious. I smiled faintly. She chose the battlefield. Then I turned back toward him. Jonathan. Yes? If everything goes the way I expect, it will. I hesitated for a moment. Then I added quietly, after tomorrow I won't have a family anymore. Jonathan studied me carefully. Are you sure about that? I thought about the woman who drove 3 hours through a storm just to hand me her last $300. And suddenly the answer felt very simple. No, I said softly. I'll finally have the right one. And if you've ever wondered what it feels like when someone who has been underestimated their entire life finally takes control, well, the next 24 hours were about to show exactly what that looks like. Wednesday morning arrived cold and bright. The Seattle skyline was painted in pale winter sunlight as I stepped out of the black SUV waiting outside my hotel. It still felt strange seeing the driver open the door for me. 3 weeks ago, I had been taking the city bus. Now I was walking into a glass office tower like someone who actually belonged there. But today wasn't about money. Today was about timing. Jonathan Pierce stood beside me on the sidewalk, adjusting the cuff of his tailored charcoal suit. "Are you ready?" he asked calmly. I looked up at the 20-story building ahead of us. Victoria's real estate company rented office space on the 20th floor. She loved the place. Glass conference rooms, polished marble lobby. It looked successful, professional, important. Exactly the image she had spent years building. And today that illusion was about to collapse. "Yes," I said. "Let's go." The elevator ride up felt strangely quiet. Jonathan stood beside me, holding a thin leather briefcase containing the documents we had prepared. Evidence, loan records, divorce paperwork, everything neatly organized. When the elevator doors opened, a young receptionist looked up from her desk. "Good morning," she said automatically. I smiled politely. "Conference room for Victoria Reed." Her expression changed slightly when she recognized the name. "Oh yes, she's expecting you." Of course she was. Victoria believed this meeting was the moment she would secure $8 million. She thought I had finally given up. The receptionist gestured toward a glass-walled room at the end of the hallway. "They're waiting inside." I nodded and walked down the corridor. Each step felt oddly calm. No anger, no nervousness, just clarity. Jonathan opened the door. Inside the room sat 3 people: my mother, my sister, and my brother. Margaret Reed sat at the head of the table, her silk blouse perfectly pressed and her pearl necklace resting neatly against her collarbone. Victoria sat beside her, scrolling through her phone impatiently. Daniel leaned casually against the window, arms crossed. The moment we entered the room, Victoria looked up. Her eyes immediately landed on Jonathan. "Who is this?" she asked. "My attorney," I replied. Her eyebrows shot up. "You brought a lawyer?" Daniel laughed. "Oh, come on, Liv, that's a little dramatic." My mother sighed. "Olivia, we're family. Lawyers aren't necessary." I pulled out the chair across from them and sat down calmly. "I disagree." Victoria tapped her manicured nails on the table. "Can we just get this over with?" She slid a familiar document toward me. The quitclaim deed. The same one she had tried to force me to sign at Thanksgiving. "Once you sign that," she said impatiently, "we can finalize the development contract this afternoon." Daniel smirked. $8 million for a useless dirt field, he added. "Honestly, Olivia, it's the smartest financial decision you've made in your entire life." Jonathan remained silent beside me. I slowly picked up the document. For a moment, I let them believe everything was going exactly how they expected. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Well?" she asked. I placed the paper back on the table. "I have a question first." Victoria rolled her eyes. "What now?" "What is the name of the company buying the land?" She waved her hand dismissively. "You don't need to worry about that." "I'd still like to know." She sighed loudly. "Victoria Reed Properties, LLC." Jonathan quietly opened his briefcase. I leaned back in my chair. "That's interesting." Victoria frowned. "Why?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. Then I slid it across the table. "What is this?" my mother asked. "Evidence," I said calmly. Victoria opened the envelope. The first document she pulled out was the IRS audit notice. Her face went pale instantly. Daniel stepped forward. "What the hell is that?" I looked directly at my sister. "Your federal tax fraud investigation." The room went completely silent. My mother's head snapped toward Victoria. "Victoria?" My sister's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I continued calmly. "You haven't sold a property in almost a year." Daniel scoffed. "That's ridiculous." I slid another document across the table. Credit card statements, 14 accounts, $247,000 in debt. Daniel stopped talking. Victoria's hands began to shake. "You've been living on borrowed money for months," I said. My mother stared at the paperwork in disbelief. "Victoria, is this true?" But Victoria didn't answer, because she was staring at the next page Jonathan placed in front of her, the email from the development company. The $8 million offer. Her breathing became shallow. "You were planning to steal my inheritance," I said quietly. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "Watch your mouth." I turned to him calmly. "Oh, don't worry. I'm getting to you next." The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder, and the real destruction hadn't even started yet. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Victoria was still staring at the papers spread across the glass table, her hands trembling slightly as she flipped through the documents one by one. The IRS audit notice, the credit card statements, the developer's $8 million offer. Every lie she had carefully constructed over the past few years now sat exposed in black and white. My mother finally broke the silence. "Victoria," Margaret whispered, her voice tight. "Tell me this isn't true." Victoria swallowed hard. "It's not what it looks like." Daniel scoffed. "Of course it's not," he said quickly, glaring at me. "Olivia probably fabricated all of this." Jonathan Pierce calmly slid another document across the table. Official IRS letterhead. Audit case number. Federal investigator contact information. Daniel stopped talking. My mother's eyes widened as she read the first paragraph. "Victoria," she repeated slowly. My sister suddenly slammed the papers onto the table. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. She turned toward me, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think digging up private financial information makes you clever?" I leaned back in my chair. "No, I think committing federal tax fraud makes you careless." Her face turned red. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I replied calmly. "You fabricated hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake business expenses." I pointed to the IRS notice. "And now the government wants it back." Daniel stepped forward again. "You're bluffing," he said. "I'm really not." Jonathan quietly placed another sheet of paper in front of him. Daniel glanced down. Then his expression changed, because the document contained the email chain between Victoria and the tech development company. Offer amount $8 million. My mother leaned forward quickly. $8 million? She looked between Victoria and me in confusion. "What is this?" I answered before my sister could. "Victoria promised to sell them my land." Margaret blinked. "But she doesn't own that property." "Exactly." Victoria's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood up. "You're twisting everything." Her voice echoed through the glass conference room. "I was helping you, Olivia." "Helping me steal my inheritance?" "I was offering you a fair deal." Daniel quickly stepped beside her. "You should be thanking her," he added. $8 million is more money than you've ever seen in your life." I almost laughed. Instead, I slowly reached into my bag and pulled out another document. Then I slid it across the table. Jonathan remained silent beside me. Victoria grabbed the page and scanned it quickly. At first, she looked confused. Then her eyes widened. Her entire face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered. Daniel snatched the paper from her hands. He read it. Then he looked up at me. "You sold the land?" "Yes." "When?" "Yesterday afternoon." Daniel's mouth opened slightly. "To who?" I leaned forward calmly. "The development company." Victoria's chair nearly tipped over as she stumbled backward. "No," she said. "You can't have." "Oh, I did." I folded my hands on the table. They were originally offering $8 million. Daniel stared at me. "But?" "I negotiated." Victoria's breathing became ragged. "How much?" she asked quietly. I looked directly at her. $10 million. The words hung in the air like a bomb going off. Daniel slammed his hand on the table again. "You're lying." Jonathan calmly turned his laptop toward them. Bank account balance, $64 million. Victoria stared at the screen in horror. "You ruined everything," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "They were my only way out." My mother turned sharply toward her. "Your only way out of what?" Victoria didn't answer, because now she understood the truth. The land was gone. The money was gone. The opportunity she had planned to steal from me had vanished. And with it, her last chance to escape the IRS investigation. Suddenly, she exploded. "This is your fault," she screamed at me. "You sabotaged me." I remained perfectly calm. "It wasn't yours to begin with." Daniel suddenly stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think this changes anything?" He pointed toward the laptop screen. "So you got lucky once. $10 million doesn't make you powerful." I slowly turned my gaze toward him. "That's interesting." "Why?" "Because we haven't talked about your finances yet." His expression tightened. "What are you talking about?" Jonathan quietly opened another folder from his briefcase. Daniel's eyes followed the movement, and for the first time since we entered the room, he looked nervous. I slid the first document across the table. Mortgage agreement. Borrower name, Margaret Reed. Loan amount, $600,000. My mother stared at the page in confusion. What is this? Daniel's face went completely pale. I met his eyes calmly. Why don't you explain it to her? He didn't move. My mother looked up slowly. Daniel? Her voice trembled slightly. Why is there a $600,000 mortgage on my house? Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't Victoria who was in trouble. It was him, and he knew it. Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there frozen beside the conference table, staring down at the mortgage document like it might somehow disappear if he refused to acknowledge it. My mother slowly lifted the page with shaking hands. Daniel? Margaret said again, her voice rising slightly. Why is there a $600,000 loan against my house? Still nothing. Victoria looked from the paper to my brother, her face pale. You told us the house was completely paid off, she said quietly. I folded my hands calmly on the table. That's what he wanted everyone to believe. Daniel suddenly straightened. This is ridiculous, he snapped. He shoved the document away. You're not going to walk in here with some fake paperwork and start accusing me of financial crimes. Jonathan Pierce calmly opened another folder. Fortunately, he said quietly, the bank records are quite real. He placed 3 more documents on the table. Loan agreement, credit line contract, property line filing, all bearing the same borrower name. Margaret Reed. My mother's breathing became uneven as she flipped through the pages. I never signed any of these, she whispered. Daniel stepped forward quickly. That's because you authorized me to manage your financial trust, he said. That doesn't mean you can mortgage my house. My mother's voice cracked. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. It was temporary. How temporary? He hesitated. Jonathan answered for him. The total borrowed amount is currently $800,000. Margaret's eyes widened in horror. $800,000? Victoria stared at Daniel. Where did the money go? Daniel's jaw tightened. Investments. Jonathan calmly turned another page. High-risk options trading, he corrected. Cryptocurrency margin positions. Leveraged derivatives. Victoria blinked. You gambled it? Daniel slammed his fist on the table. It wasn't gambling. It was strategic market positioning. Jonathan didn't react. Instead, he quietly slid another sheet across the table. A portfolio performance graph. A steep red line falling downward. Total investment loss. $1,326,000. The room went completely silent. Daniel stared at the chart like it was personally insulting him. You lost everything, Victoria whispered. My brother looked furious now. The market turned unexpectedly. That's not what this says, Jonathan replied calmly. He tapped another section. Your margin positions collapsed 18 months ago. Daniel shifted his weight. I was recovering the losses. With borrowed money? I asked quietly. His eyes snapped toward me. You don't understand finance. No, I said calmly. But I understand math. I pointed at the graph. And the numbers say you destroyed your entire net worth. Margaret slowly lowered the documents onto the table. Her face had gone completely pale. You put my house at risk. Daniel looked defensive. I was protecting our family's future. You forged my signature, she whispered. He didn't deny it. Victoria stepped back from the table. Oh my God. Daniel turned toward her angrily. Don't start acting like you're innocent here. At least I didn't steal from our mother. You were about to steal $8 million from Olivia. The argument exploded instantly. Victoria shouted back. Daniel yelled louder. My mother sat in the middle of the chaos, staring down at the papers like her entire world had just cracked open. I watched quietly. For 30 years, my family had presented a perfect image. Successful, elegant, superior. Now the truth was unraveling in front of them. And it was ugly. Finally, Margaret slammed her hand on the table. Enough! Both of them stopped. She looked at Daniel with an expression I had never seen before. Fear. How much do I owe the bank? Jonathan answered calmly. The outstanding balance across all loans is approximately $800,000. And the payments? Daniel has already missed the last 2. My mother's breath caught. What happens if we miss another? Jonathan didn't soften the answer. The bank begins foreclosure proceedings. Margaret looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under her. My house. She whispered the words like she was trying to convince herself they weren't real. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I can fix it. How? Victoria snapped. The market will recover. Jonathan calmly opened the final page in the folder, a red stamp notice across the top. Final demand. Intent to foreclose. Daniel's face drained of color. "You're already in default," Jonathan said. The room fell silent again, because now the truth had fully landed. The Reed family wasn't wealthy. They were bankrupt. Victoria buried her face in her hands. Daniel looked like he wanted to punch something. And my mother sat completely still, staring at the foreclosure notice. Then she slowly lifted her head and looked at me. "You knew all of this," she said quietly. "Yes." "You planned this meeting?" "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "You're enjoying watching us suffer." For a moment I didn't answer. Then I stood up slowly. "No," I said calmly. "I'm just making sure everyone finally sees the truth." Daniel scoffed. "So what now?" He crossed his arms. "You think exposing us changes anything?" His voice turned mocking again. "You still don't have any real power." I looked at Jonathan. He nodded slightly, which meant it was finally time for the last part. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin document. Then I placed it gently in the center of the table. My mother looked down at it. Her eyes scanned the first line. Then she froze. "What is this?" Jonathan spoke quietly beside me. "That," he said, "is the official foreclosure transfer record." Margaret's hands began shaking. "Transfer? To who?" I met her eyes calmly. "To the new property owner." The room felt completely still. Daniel frowned. "And who the hell is that?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Me." For several seconds, nobody moved. My mother simply stared at the foreclosure document lying in the center of the table, like it was written in another language. Daniel was the first to react. He laughed, a short, sharp sound filled with disbelief. "Oh, please," he said, shaking his head. "You expect us to believe that?" Victoria looked equally confused. "You?" she repeated. "You bought the house?" I calmly folded my arms. "Not exactly." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Of course not." Jonathan Pierce stepped forward and placed another sheet of paper on the table. Corporate ownership record. Buyer, North Cascade Holdings, LLC. My mother blinked at the name. "I've never heard of that company." "You wouldn't have," Jonathan said calmly. Victoria looked at me slowly. "What does that have to do with you?" I leaned forward slightly. "I own it." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had happened in the room so far. Daniel scoffed. "You're broke, Olivia. You couldn't even afford a decent apartment 6 months ago. And now you're telling us you bought a multi-million-dollar house." I met his eyes calmly. "That's correct." Victoria shook her head. "This is insane." My mother finally spoke again. "How would you possibly have the money for something like that?" Her voice sounded strained now, almost desperate. I glanced toward Jonathan. He nodded once. So I reached into my bag and slowly pulled out the final document. Then I placed it in front of them. A bank account statement. Victoria grabbed it first. Her eyes moved down the page, then suddenly stopped. Her lips parted. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. "What?" She didn't answer, so he snatched the paper from her hands. His eyes scanned the numbers. Then his entire face drained of color. Account balance, $64 million. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. I finally stood up. The room suddenly felt too small for the moment. "It's my account." Victoria looked like she was struggling to breathe. $64 million? Daniel's voice rose. "That's impossible." I took a slow breath. "Not really." My mother stared at me. "Where did you get that kind of money?" For the first time since the meeting began, I smiled. "A lottery ticket." The words hit the room like a shockwave. Victoria blinked repeatedly. "You're joking." "I'm not." Daniel shook his head. "No. This has to be some kind of trick." Jonathan calmly stepped forward again. "The funds were deposited 3 weeks ago," he explained. $54 million from the Powerball jackpot. He tapped the account summary. And $10 million from the land sale. Victoria suddenly grabbed the table to steady herself. "You won the lottery?" "Yes." "And you didn't tell us?" I looked at her calmly. "I called Mom that same night." My mother frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The emergency room." Her eyes widened slightly. "That wasn't real." "No." I held her gaze. "It was a test." The realization slowly spread across her face. "You lied to me." "I wanted to know if my family would help me when I needed it." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. And because we didn't hand you money immediately, you decided to destroy us? I tilted my head slightly. You destroyed yourselves. Victoria's breathing became faster. If you had this money, why didn't you just help us? The question hung in the air. I thought about it for a moment, then answered honestly. Because you were willing to frame an innocent person for a crime. All three of them went silent again. Jonathan quietly slid another folder onto the table. Daniel frowned. What's that? Divorce paperwork. Victoria's head snapped toward him. What? Jonathan opened the folder. These documents formally transfer $420,000 from Mr. Daniel Reed's offshore account into a new account belonging to his wife. Daniel's face twisted in anger. You've been digging through my accounts? Yes. And if you refuse to sign the documents, Jonathan continued calmly, the evidence of financial fraud and wire theft will be forwarded to federal investigators. The room felt like it had suddenly lost all oxygen. Daniel stared at the paperwork, then at me. You wouldn't. Try me. For a long moment he didn't move. Then his shoulders slowly dropped, because he understood something very clearly now. He had lost. Daniel grabbed the pen from the table and signed the papers. The scratching sound of ink on paper echoed loudly through the silent room. Jonathan calmly collected the documents. That concludes the legal matters, he said. But I wasn't finished yet. I walked toward the door, then paused. My mother looked up at me. Olivia. Her voice sounded small now. Where are we supposed to go? I met her eyes. The bank will give you 48 hours to leave the property. Her expression collapsed completely. You're evicting us. Yes. Victoria's voice cracked. You can't do this. I opened the door. I already did. Then I stepped into the hallway, because the final chapter of my old family had officially ended, and the life waiting on the other side of that door was finally mine.
Your box just then? Are you neighbouring? Is Louisiana a neighbouring state to Florida? Superman? Or is there something in between you guys? There are two states in between. Oh, really? What are they? The scenery is nice in American Truck Simulator too as well. American Truck Simulator as well. But it's different, isn't it? It's different. They would have... I wonder what they did. I wonder if they actually... Like, did they fly anyone around to these different countries, or did they just go by Google Maps and stuff, I wonder, when they created these maps?
No, they actually do research per state in the States. They do the same thing in the Europe.
So
they actually have teams that go out and do photographs and
oh, nice. That's awesome.
A lot of things.
That's awesome.
And they talk to locals.
Oh, that's awesome. Mississippi and Alabama are in between you and Florida. Okay. Do you know Bun the Bun Bunny? She's always going down to Alabama. Whoa! She's always driving down there from Wisconsin. She lives in Wisconsin, but she's got family in Alabama, so she's driving down there often.